In the 14th century, humanity faced an enemy it could not see, could not fight, and could not escape. It traveled silently, hidden inside ordinary trade ships. Within a few years, it erased nearly 1/3 of Europe. This was not a war. This was not a revolution. This was the Black Death. Before the plague, Europe was changing. Cities were growing. Markets were expanding. Trade routes connected continents like never before. To many, this felt like progress. But this movement carried something unseen, something lethal. Ships arrived daily from distant lands. They brought spices, silk, gold, and unknowingly, disease. This era of expansion was powered by a vast network of trade routes. These were the arteries of the medieval world, carrying silks from the east, spices from distant lands, wool from the fields of England. Merchants, pilgrims, traveled these roads and sea lanes, their journeys weaving a complex tapestry of culture and commerce across the continent. These connections brought immense wealth and new ideas, fueling the growth of cities like Venice, Genoa, Florence. The world was becoming smaller, more interconnected. But this very interconnectedness, this celebrated achievement of human endeavor, carried with it an unseen danger that no one could have possibly predicted or prepared for. Imagine the dusty roads filled with carts, the seas dotted with the sails of merchant ships. Each journey was a thread connecting one part of the world to another, a symbol of human ingenuity and desire for more. The Black Death was caused by a bacterium known as Yersinia pestis. It lived inside fleas. Those fleas lived on rats, and rats followed human civilization everywhere. When rats died, the fleas searched for new hosts, human hosts. Historians believe the disease began in Central Asia. It moved slowly along trade routes until it reached Europe. Fleas would bite an infected rat, drink its blood filled with the deadly bacteria, and then jump to another rat, spreading the infection. They scurried aboard the caravans that traveled the legendary Silk Road and climbed the ropes of ships docked in busy ports. They carried their lethal cargo of infected fleas with them, moving silently along the world's most important trade routes. As merchants journeyed west, they unknowingly brought this invisible killer with them. By the 1340s, it had reached the edges of the Black Sea, devastating the trading city of Kaffa. The bacteria, carried by rats and fleas, had successfully hitched a ride on the engine of human civilization. It was a biological invasion on a scale never seen before, moving with the speed of commerce. The very system that brought prosperity was now spreading a pestilence that would bring Europe to its knees, one ship at a time, one caravan at a time. This journey was a quiet one. There were no invading armies, no thundering cannons. The enemy was invisible to the naked eye, hidden in the fur of a common rat and the gut of a tiny flea. People along the way fell ill and died. But in a world without modern medicine, the true cause was a complete mystery. They saw the effects, the sudden sickness, the swift death, but they could not see the source. And so, the unseen traveler continued its relentless march westward, carried on the winds of trade and the tides of the sea, destined for the shores of a continent that was completely unprepared for its arrival. In October of 1347, 12 ships arrived at the port of Messina, Italy. Most of the crew were already dead. Those still alive were dying. Within days, the city was infected. From Messina, the plague spread to Genoa, Venice, Marseille. Every road became a path of death. In the short time the ships were docked, rats had scurried down the mooring ropes and onto the docks. They disappeared into the city's warehouses and alleys. The fleas they carried, desperate for a new host, found the people of Messina. There was no escape. From Messina, the disease spread with terrifying speed. It was like a fire leaping from one dry patch of grass to the next. Fleeing residents carried the sickness with them to the mainland of Italy. Ships, unaware they were carrying a deadly cargo, sailed from Sicily to Genoa. Ships sailed to Venice. Ships sailed to Marseille. Within months, the plague was no longer confined to the coasts. It began to move inland, following the rivers and the trade roads that crisscrossed the continent. It traveled in carts of grain. It traveled in bundles of cloth. It traveled in the bodies of the people trying to outrun it. Everywhere it went, it left a trail of devastation. The arrival was so sudden, so overwhelming, it seemed supernatural. People had no concept of germs or contagion as we do today. They only knew that after the arrival of those ships, death began to stalk their streets. It moved from house to house, from town to town, with relentless force. The ports and roads that had been symbols of prosperity became highways for catastrophe. The door had been opened, and the Black Death had walked right in. The symptoms appeared without warning. A person could feel perfectly healthy in the morning and be overcome by illness before nightfall. The first signs were often mundane. A sudden fever chills a feeling of exhaustion, much like a common flu. But this was quickly followed by intense aches and pains that racked the entire body. The victim would become weak and disoriented, often taking to their bed overwhelmed by a feeling of dread and physical misery. Soon after, the most distinctive and horrifying symptom would appear. Painful swellings, known as buboes, would erupt on the body, hard inflamed lumps in the lymph nodes, most often in the groin, under the armpits, on the neck. They started small, perhaps the size of an almond, but could quickly grow to the size of an apple or even an orange. The skin over the bubo would stretch and turn a dark, purplish-black color, which is how the plague likely earned its name, the Black Death. The pain from these swellings was said to be excruciating, a constant, burning agony. For most, the end came swiftly. Once the buboes appeared, the victim's health would decline at a shocking pace. Many would develop a high fever and become delirious, speaking incoherently, seeing things that were not there. As the plague spread, cities collapsed from within. Homes were sealed shut, entire streets emptied overnight. The living feared the dead, and the dead were everywhere. In some regions, more than half the population disappeared. Church bells tolled endlessly for the dead. Then the bells fell silent, no one left to ring them. Early on, funerals were still held with dignity. Priests performed last rites. Families mourned. Soon there were too many bodies and too few to bury them. Coffin makers couldn't keep up. Gravediggers died or refused the work. Bodies were left in homes or abandoned on streets. Rituals of grief ceased. Cities dug mass graves outside their walls. Huge pits were dug in fields. Carts rolled through streets daily. Carters called, "Bring out your dead." Bodies were piled onto carts with little ceremony. They were dumped into pits, layered like lasagna. Open graves full of neighbors were a constant, horrifying reminder. Death was everywhere. It had lost its sacred meaning. As fear spread faster than the disease itself, people searched desperately for answers, and what followed would reshape society forever. With no cure and no explanation, people turned to faith. Many believed the plague was God's punishment. Others searched for someone to blame. Entire communities were accused. Fear turned neighbor against neighbor. Doctors were powerless. Medicine had no answers. Doctors were powerless. Medicine had no answers. Some wore strange masks, filled with herbs to block the smell of death. Others prescribed bloodletting or prayers. Most treatments did nothing. When the plague finally faded, Europe was forever changed. Millions were gone. Labor became scarce. Survivors demanded better wages. Old power structures began to collapse. The modern world was quietly beginning. The Black Death killed between 75 and 200 million people. It reshaped medicine, it reshaped society, and it proved one truth: humanity survives by adapting. The Black Death is not just history, it is a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, the world is never the same again. If this story moved you, subscribe to explore the lost eras of human history.